When you talk cloud, especially when you're talking enterprise, everybody's going to DevOps. Everybody's thinking of DevOps. Everybody's talking about DevOps. And they've been talking about it for a few years now. But is it really real? That's what I'm asking here with Matt Allford. So welcome. It's good to have you here for a tech talk. Tell me a little bit more.
Thanks, Stephen. So yeah, my name's Matt Allford. I'm from good old Australia, so it's been a good trek over here. And yeah, DevOps, fun topic, right? So for lack of a better term, I've been a DevOps engineer for the past 3, 4, maybe even bleeding into 5 years. And I've got some mixed feelings about, you know, that title, what it means, what DevOps really means, what it was meant to be, what it's sort of become. And yeah, I guess we can unpack that a little bit.
So when it comes to that, I think that the idea with DevOps was basically to break down the wall between development side of IT and the operations side of IT. I mean, it's right there in the name, DevOps. But and that wall was real. I mean, even as far back as, you know, when I started my IT career in the 90s, it was absolutely true. I mean, we did not talk over that wall. We did not talk to the developers. We didn't know what they were doing. We didn't care what they were doing. They had applications with funny names, and our job in operations was to make it freaking run. And there was really very little communication apart from sort of SLAs. Is that really what DevOps was about? And is it really what it, well, let's start with, is that really what it was supposed to be?
I think that's where the foundation came from, is breaking down the silos, opening up the communication and working better as teams within an organization. That's the foundations of it. And I came from the operational side of the fence as well, so I absolutely mirror what you just said. We got thrown a new software package or a release, and it's like, hey, go and deploy this. And it's like, cool, I've got no idea how this works, what it does, what you want me to do, or anything like that. And I will admit, in my years as being a DevOps engineer, I did work a lot closer with software developers, and I'm not a programmer. I've started to understand, you know, .NET and how that works and how to build it and how to release it. And don't put me in front of .NET code and ask me to write it, but because no one's going to appreciate that. But I can absolutely, you know, do the fundamentals of software delivery with that, and I can work with developers and say, hey, you know, we're getting this error, or, you know, you're doing this in your pipelines, but what if we did this instead and made it more, you know, quicker to release or easier to release or something like that. So I think over time we have broken down those silos for the most part, but one of the interesting things that's popped up, whether you're outsourcing or sometimes internally, you know, within an organization, is now there's this notion of a DevOps engineer and a DevOps engineering team. And now you've got this team of DevOps engineers, I keep quoting it because I'm not a fan of the term, who are now potentially another silo within that. So we've gone back to potentially having developers and then DevOps engineers who are responsible for infrastructure as code and releases and whatever else. And now we've got platform engineering to throw on the other end of that as well, which people are now confusing with DevOps engineering too. And we can talk about platform engineering.
Well, let's talk about that. What
Sure.
is platform engineering?
I actually released, so I've got a newsletter which I send out every 2 weeks, and this morning I released edition number 8, so it's a pretty new thing. And in that I have sent out some information from a fellow Pluralsight author and friend of mine, Steve Buchanan, who works over at Microsoft. And he's done some great articles and content on breaking down platform engineering. And I think at the end of the day, people assume that it's an evolution of this sysadmin DevOps engineer just into a new role or a new name or a new title, but platform engineering is, for me, and how I interpret it, is all about engineers within an organization who create a platform, usually for software developers, that are abstracting away the underlying infrastructure and the underlying platform and allowing developers to leverage, to have an internal development platform. That's, for me, the core of it, and there's some companies that do this really well.
Yeah, I mean, it's right there in the name, that what it's supposed to be, and I applaud that. But I've heard some pushback from the software development side of things, that DevOps is really not DevOps; it's really ops except modern. And how does that hurt you when I say that?
A little bit.
Okay.
Yeah. But I don't necessarily disagree with it, and I've heard and seen similar things, and there's this boundary and there's these lines that have still got to be drawn as to what this actually means, right? Like, we can't, in my opinion, expect developers to suddenly start provisioning and managing, cloud infrastructure. I talk to developers today that barely know how DNS works, let alone load balancers and application gateways and, caching and virtual networks and private networking and all that sort of stuff that goes with infrastructure operational people. So I think there's still a line in the sand of developers are good at what they're doing and cutting code and writing software and bugs and features, and the operational people are still good at what they do. We just need to blend that together and allow developers to consume infrastructure as code maybe. So the operations people are still responsible for writing it, managing it, making sure that it's adhering to the security requirements of your organization, but then making it easily consumable for those developers to say, hey, I need a Cosmos database right now with a front end, web front end, and I can deploy that as a template. Not necessarily have to do the old school, log the ticket, have it sit there for weeks before someone picks it up and starts to action it.
So in this DevOps world, is there still IT developers? Is there still IT operations? I mean, or is DevOps just going to eat the world?
I think there still, for a period of time, will be these specialities within the DevOps world. I don't know that we can ever get away from that. I think that people will cross over. There will be operational people who will want to learn software development, and they'll have their IT operational background to bring to strengthening that role and that collaboration, and vice versa as well. But at the end of the day, I don't think we can do it all. I mean, IT is getting that big. You've still got to get pretty niche in your speciality and what you can go deep on, and then stay a little bit broad. And I think that in itself is just going to mean that we still need our own specialities. We just need to make sure that we keep collaborating, working together as a team. Keep those silos broken down, because as soon as the walls come up is where it all goes pear-shaped.
Well, can't you just be a 10x full stack engineer?
You could, yeah. I don't know I could, but just do it all right. Full stack, everything under the hood.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's funny though. I mean, I can't tell you how many times people have said, when they hear, oh, you're in IT, you work with computers, you work in data center IT. Where did you go to school? What languages did you study? That sort of thing. They assume that, software development is somehow related to IT, which is kind of hilarious, because at least on the IT ops side, software development could not be further from the truth, because it's like you just never had anything to do with that. But in the modern world of cloud platforms, basically cloud platforms are specifically software engineering integrated. I mean, that's kind of what the definition of the cloud is to me, is that it's application integrated infrastructure and platforms. And in that world, I think that absolutely we do need to know at least the basics of software development. We need to know the basics of data structures and of programming. And similarly, like you saying, I wish that software developers knew the basics of IT operations, of storage, of networking, of compute, because again, these things matter, and I see a lot of the time that developers make a lot of assumptions about what their system is going to run on and how it's going to run and what they need to take care of that may not be realistic, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think back to some of my first jobs in IT, especially one of them being at a university. That was one of the most siloed places that I worked at. There was the network team, and there was the SQL database team, and there was, and it just went like that. And it was kind of nice, because when it was someone else's problem, it was someone else's problem. But at the same time, it led to so many issues within that environment and the communication across the teams. I absolutely agree. IT operations folks need to. If you haven't already and you're in that role, you need to certainly start understanding, software development, the build and release cycles. One of the best things that I think I did early-ish on was starting to learn PowerShell, because that, it's not a full-blown programming language by any means, but it got me into scripting, comfortable with command line interfaces, comfortable with reading code, which has bled into, infrastructure as code and being comfortable with that, and putting it in source control, having pipelines, build and release it. So on and so forth. But yeah, I think there's a new baseline of what we all in IT need to try and learn and understand, especially with cloud platforms, because there's a lot of information out there that's like, oh, I don't care where this runs and how it runs, it's just a container. But there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes and under the hood of that does matter still for delivering that application to the end users, and someone's got to be responsible for that.
Yeah, well, I'm going to give a quick shout out to another language that I think is very friendly and very approachable for the IT operations crowd is Python. There is so much, there's such a great community around that, and it's such a great way to learn the fundamentals of programming without having to really become a software developer.
Yep. Yep. I would absolutely.
No
agree.
offense to the Python developers out there. That's not what I meant. But yeah, it's just a really great community, and it's a really approachable language. So, well, thank you so much for this conversation. I know that people are going to have more questions. I know you talk about this all the time. Can you mention again kind of where you publish things and tell us a little more about your newsletter?
Yeah, for sure. So my publishing, the easiest place to find me and link off to me is just mattallford.com. I've kind of got everything linked off there. But yeah, the newsletter I started, I guess, 16 weeks ago because I'm at the 8th edition, and I've been releasing it fortnightly, or at least trying to. And the idea behind the newsletter is just to be, here's 5 things that I've seen over the last fortnight that I think would be interesting to technologists out there. And I give my little take on it, link off to the article or the piece, and go from there. And what I've started, since the start of this, I've had a podcast recommendation with every episode that's gone out as well. That'll end at some point because I don't listen to hundreds of podcasts. But I'll change it up at that point and change it to something else. So if that sounds interesting to you, it's newsletter.mattallford.com, just a first name and an email address, and you'll be signed up to that. So,
well, that's great. Thank you. And if you need a podcast recommendation, the On-Premise IT podcast from Gestalt IT, really ace. I'm the host of that. And also I would check out the Gestalt IT Rundown, which is our weekly tech news show. But we're here in California for Cloud Field Day. So if you go to techfieldday.com, you can learn more about Cloud Field Day 18. It's going to be live streaming on LinkedIn, and it's also going to be recorded and posted at YouTube/techfieldday. So check out those videos as well. Thank you for joining us for this Gestalt IT Tech Talk, and check out more at gestaltit.com.